When I was 16, I was a student at St. Paul Open School. Open School's name was Literal. At 16, I could leave the building as I pleased. I had a fake ID that said I was 21, and I looked it. I knew I wasn't going to college. In my family, there was no plan for that. We were working class. The idea was that I should try to find a job with Benny's and then keep that job until I died. Something at the Ford plant, maybe working for the city. My dad once tried to get me a job as a groundsman for the Parks Department. The big selling point was that it paid $25K a year, and in the late 80s, that was kick-ass money for mowing municipal lawns. I declined because I was a pale, cigarette-smoking vampire wannabe, and truth be told, I have always been on record as hating lawns. I was obsessed with moving out of my parents' house, and the only thing that seemed exciting to me was the idea of getting my own apartment. I wanted to do it early, before I turned 18. About 6 or 7 months after the story takes place, I did move out. I never got legally emancipated or anything. What I did was I ran away for 3 days. I wanted to prove to my parents that I could disappear without them knowing where I'd gone. I returned after the 3 days and I confronted my parents. My mother's face was bloated from nonstop sobbing. My father's face was a furious tomato red. I stood my ground and I said, "Either you let me move out or I'm gonna go next time for good. You can't lock me in this house and you can't keep an eye on me all the time." It was a shitty thing to do. My mother wailed, my father growled at me to get out, and then I was free. I was an angry kid, and without getting into it, I will tell you that there were good reasons for me to be angry. It felt justified. I was too young to intelligently articulate why I had the anger that I had. I was too young and I was too afraid to say why. So all I had was this barely contained rage and desolation, because I didn't see anything at the end of high school other than working a shitty job that I would never give a rat's ass about. But about 6 or 7 months after I moved out, 6 or 7 months before I moved out of my parents' house, when the story takes place, I ditched school. A lot. It got to the point where I was not there more than I was. I'd go get coffee at different diners and cafes all day, nursing a $2 cup for hours. I'd write in my notebooks, imagining a lawn-free future. I did have a job. I worked a phone desk at the St. Paul Pioneer Press, downtown St. Paul. Part-time, no bennies, but it was a very glamorous job for a kid to have. It paid $7 an hour, which was very good money in the mid-1980s for a high school kid. I would cold call people from the phone book and try to get them to buy newspaper delivery. To amuse myself, I would use different voices, and I finally settled on what I considered to be my grown-up voice, a carefully modulated contralto. Nothing too high-pitched. I wanted my voice to carry authority, to inspire trust in a quality newspaper delivered dry and on time. My hours were 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. weeknights. So I had money. My basic needs were being met at home, so the money I made at my job was for whatever adventure I could cook up. And one time during a winter daytime ditch day, I was tired of waiting for the city bus to arrive, and I started thinking about cars, as in how great it would be to get in a warm one right about then. It was freezing outside, and I thought about calling a taxi to take me where I wanted to go, but I had no specific destination in mind. My main point in getting on a bus was just to go somewhere other than school. To just go, and it was cold outside, and I didn't want to wait for a bus, and I didn't want to go back to school, and I thought about calling a taxi cab to just take me somewhere, but I couldn't think of where, and I couldn't go home, and it wasn't time for work, and then I had this amazing idea. I ducked into the Cafe Latte on Grand Avenue, and I went to the public phone, and I took the big, thick phone book out, and I looked up limousine companies. I used my fake grown-up voice, and I confidently ordered a limousine. What were they going to do if they found out I was a kid? Hang up on me. Big deal. Grown-ups hung up on me all the time, every night at the Pioneer Press. Did you know that limousine companies sometimes don't ask a lot of questions? Especially if it's a midday booking on a weekday. Did you know that in 1985 you could rent a limo for $125 for 3 hours? 30 minutes after that phone call, I got into a toasty, warm, black stretch limo, and I laughed because I was standing on the corner of Victoria and Grand, and a little guy popped out of a limo in a suit with an official-looking cap, and he ran around to the other side of the car and let me in. I gave him $125, and he asked me where I wanted to go. So I told him that I wanted to go to my old high school, Johnson Senior High, on the east side. And he asked me what I wanted to listen to, and I didn't know what was appropriate for a limo, so I asked for classical music. And at this point, it was about 2 p.m. in the afternoon. School was getting out, so I had the limo pull into the parking lot of the Tom Thumb convenience store. And I looked at some of the kids who were hanging out in front, smoking and flirting and their breath freezing in the air. And when my limo pulled into the small parking lot, they just stared. The driver asked me if I was going to go in, and I said no. He could turn the engine off if he wanted to. We parked, and I just looked at those kids, looking at the limo. Tinted glass, blackout windows. They couldn't see anything. I had just left Johnson the year before, and I had a chip on my shoulder about the experience. I hated the popular kids. I hated the social structure. I hated the idea that you needed designer jeans. I hated the girls who didn't include me, and I hated the boys who thought loud girls like me were a problem. I didn't hate everybody there, but there were a couple of kids out in front of that Tom Thumb that I really didn't care for, and I just relished staring at them from behind the tinted windows of that limo. I felt like a James Bond villain. I poured myself a cranberry juice from a little plastic bottle on ice into a heavy cut glass tumbler. I held the glass languidly, and I crossed my legs, and I focused my disdain. The kids out in front of the store were kind of buzzing about it. They were like, oh my God, there's some random limo in the parking lot of Tom Thumb, and it's just sitting there, and no one's getting out. A few more kids joined the gawkers, and when I felt that I had stared at them all long enough, I had the driver start the car back up and pull over to the group of kids very slowly. And then I pushed the electric window down so that it went down halfway, and at least a couple of kids' eyes widened in recognition at me, and I held my glass of cranberry juice up at them confidently, and I said, fuck all of you. And then I buzzed the window back up, and I asked the driver to take me to the drive-thru at McDonald's. I had my driver change the radio station to KQ, and then he told me stories about famous people that he'd driven around, Steve Perry, Julio Iglesias. And then, when our time was up, I had him drop me off at the Pioneer Press, where I sat in a cubicle and cold called people for the next 4 hours, using my fake grown-up voice, keeping my register smooth and unruffled, enunciating clearly each syllable of each word, the way I imagined a real adult would speak, following my script, fantasizing about finally transforming into a person who would speak that way naturally.